Hi, I'm Gail Rubin. Welcome to A Good Goodbye, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. Hi, I'm Gail Rubin, host and author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. Welcome to today's show, brought to you by the fine folks at French Funerals and Cremations. As the doyen of death, check out the pearls, I'm all about getting the funeral planning conversation started. A doyen is a woman who's considered senior in a group, who knows a lot about a particular subject, and that would be me when it comes to the party no one wants to plan, funerals or memorial services. By thinking about what you'd want in your funeral and having that conversation before there's a death or illness, you can reduce stress at a time of grief, minimize family conflict, save money, and create a meaningful, memorable, good goodbye. That's what this program is all about. Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, and your family will benefit from the conversation. So let's get that conversation started. Our guests today are Chris Keller and Vaughn Hendren from French Funerals and Cremations. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Hi, Gail. Nice to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of U.S. cemeteries. They've really gone through a lot of evolutions over, say, the past 200 years. What might you say is, say, in the past 10, 15 years?
Cemeteries themselves have always served a very practical purpose. They're a place for final disposition of a body when a death occurs. You have to place the body somewhere. In the recent period of time, and probably that's a good time frame, 10, 15 years, they've become more and more a place of self-expression and celebration of a life lived, not just a place of disposition for a body that's dead. And I think you're seeing that trend more and more as people, particularly the generation that's now coming to fruition here, are wanting to personalize. They're wanting something unique. They're wanting to make a statement, even in death. Mm-hmm. And cemeteries are increasingly finding ways to help facilitate that for people.
And of course, one of the biggest things is the changes in the industry as far as cremation.
Mm-hmm.
So that has changed cemetery immensely. We now have niche walls. We now have scattering gardens that we never did have in the past. Mm-hmm. Because of the change of cremation.
Well, I know I'm on the cemetery committee for my synagogue, and we actually put in a row of cremated remains plots, mm-hmm. because even among Jews, it's becoming more common to incorporate cremation.
Absolutely.
When people go shopping for a burial plot, what kind of issues are they concerned about?
Probably one of the biggest concerns, and they don't realize this till they get out to the cemetery, is the feel. Mm. Once we have one of our counselors take them out, and they've decided that they want ground burial or a niche, we take them out into the gardens, mm-hmm. and just walk them around, showing them the different points of interest, some of the different areas where there's ponds and where there's different walls, trees, etc. And inevitably, the families will come to a place and say, this just feels right. Mm-hmm. So something that you don't think about till you get out there.
And that it's tough to quantify or describe, but that you see play out again and again. There's practical considerations. Sometimes they want to be near where great-granddad's buried. Mm-hmm. And so if we mm-hmm. can get them closer to the family members, that might be a consideration. But even within that, to Vaughn's point, mm-hmm. they'll reach a spot and they want to be under that tree, mm-hmm. or next to that water feature, or with that view of the mountain, and it just feels right, and the one 5 feet to the left doesn't. And you can't describe it.
One of the things I find is they want to see who am I going to be spending eternity next to?
Yeah, they want to know who their neighbors are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, cemetery costs are separate usually from funeral costs. Are people generally aware of that, or is that a surprise when people are coming in and making arrangements, especially at need?
I think that It's probably 50-50. I think those who have prearranged their funerals tend to be more aware of the additional costs coming down the road. A lot of times when a death occurs and it hasn't been planned for, it's a surprise. Even when the person has maybe been ill and the family has had some time nominally to think about the upcoming need, they don't really oftentimes until it actually happens. And then in the midst of their own grief, they're trying to make 18,000 decisions. They go to the mortuary in most cases and they work through all those decisions. And oftentimes it's not until the very end of that conversation where they realize, wait a minute, we're only halfway there. There's another half to the death care arrangement process that now has to be addressed. We've taken care of the funeral, but now what do we do for a final disposition or final resting place? And so I do think, unfortunately, a lot of people are surprised. When mom or dad took care of the arrangements years and years ago and the kids were told by mom and dad it's all taken care of, a lot of times it isn't. And so the family comes into the conversation expecting one thing and then are brought up short by the fact that maybe it wasn't taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right, Gail. A lot of folks do, and I think Chris is right also, about 50% don't realize or they don't think about that ahead of time, and that's why it is so important as far as
To plan
pre-planning,
ahead, yeah.
because then you are made aware either by the funeral pre-planner,
Mm-hmm.
which can then be sent over to the cemetery pre-planner. So very important to take care of that in advance.
Mm-hmm. And to have a conversation to let your family know,
Absolutely.
because, for example, my parents did pre-plan and have burial plots, but I'm from the Washington, D.C. area originally, and we don't live there anymore.
Correct.
And they don't live there anymore. So, but I know that there will be body shipment involved
Right.
whenever that time does come.
Right.
So it's important to, know those things.
Yeah.
And perhaps you would have families that do move and then maybe decide, well, I think I'll give up my plot.
Yeah, and really what you're referring to there is another kind of cultural change that's occurred in the last decades where we're a far more mobile society than we were 50 or 100 years ago. And so where the trend before was to buy a family plot, a lot of times dad would buy a plot for he and his wife and then all of the kids, sometimes even beyond that. Then what happens when all the kids scatter across the country in their various careers and their lives? And they don't want to go back to Ohio to be buried because they live in Albuquerque now. And so you do have more and more people who have that property, that legacy property that the family's owned, that now are trying to sell it on the open market or sell it back to the cemeteries because they're not going to be there anymore. So that does inhibit sometimes people from pre-planning the cemetery piece because they don't know where they'll be hopefully 10 or 15 or 20 years from now.
Anything to add on that?
No, just the fact that, even with cremation, it does make, since people are mobile, makes it easier to do that. Although it always is very nice to have a final resting place and a place to visit. So that's never going to change, even if you do have to sell that property and purchase property in a different cemetery.
And I know that religiously that's important for Catholics
Correct.
and Jews
Very.
to have a place to visit some final remains. Over the course of the year, when do you usually see the most visitors coming to a cemetery?
Well, by far, probably the biggest day is between Memorial Day and Christmas Eve. Both of those we have, first of all, we have a very nice program out at Sunset Memorial Park where people come all day for the most part. And so we honor the loved ones, we honor all of the veterans, we place a flag at every veteran's grave on that day. And then Christmas Eve, it's interesting, my wife and I went out Christmas Eve when I first started working there, and it's so neat to see so many people out there, and they bring pizza and they have a time, and it's like
And
this is
luminarias.
luminarias, and it's we
and
have to
Christmas
have
trees. Oh, it's
yeah,
packed.
we have to have
It
security
is.
just to take care of the
Just traffic flow.
traffic control.
Wow.
But the first thing that hit me was, wow, these people could be doing something else. And they take the time out of this busy holiday season to come and commemorate and
And
remember.
And be with their loved ones.
You know, another time, there are distinct periods of time or days where the visitation at a cemetery goes up. We joke about it, you'll come through a long winter and everything's still rather brown, and you'll get right before Mother's Day and the park blooms. And it's because at Mother's Day, everyone shows up and places flowers, beautiful flowers on their mom's grave. And so really, to Vaughn's point, from Mother's Day through Memorial Day is a high volume time. lots of visits to the park, and then around Christmas time.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll continue our conversation when we come back with Chris and Vaughn and dig a little bit deeper into the topic of cemeteries.
How can you eat like that?
Relax, dude. I'm freaking dead. It's one of the perks. I can eat whatever the hell I want.
How do I get in on it?
What, the whole death thing?
Yeah.
First off, I mean, look at what you're eating. No wonder you've lived this long. Feed this to the village cow, all right? Bring him a glass of your finest expired milk. Oh, before you go checking out, do you have a will, any funeral arrangements, plans like that?
Did you?
No, and because of that, now my family's in turmoil. They're fighting, bickering over money. Now they're dead broke. Do some real planning, okay, before you figure out your exit strategy. See? Everybody's doing it.
I can't wait to get started.
I've never seen anybody dying to die like you. Good luck, kid.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Chris Keller and Vaughn Hendren from French Funerals and Cremation, and let's continue the conversation about cemetery issues. So there are multiple parts to a cemetery plot and when a burial takes place. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, wait a minute. There are. The property itself, the plot, quote unquote, is the thing that most people think about as the cost of a cemetery funeral arrangement, and that's certainly part of it. You have to have a place. But beyond that, different cemeteries have different regulations as to whether or not an outer burial enclosure or vault is necessary. Many cemeteries, Sunset included, I would say most of the very well-maintained ones will require some kind of an outer enclosure that has to be purchased, and that the casket or the urn actually sit within. And so it encompasses and protects the casket. And really the reason that is necessary is for a not only an appearance standpoint, but a safety in the park. The vault protects the casket or the urn from the earth load and from the load of people and equipment on top of it. And that's fairly critical when you're talking about tons and tons of earth and or equipment. And so it also allows the cemetery immediately after a burial to maintain that beautiful green, lush, smooth look and
Surface.
appearance without piles of dirt everywhere, which can be very disturbing to people. So most cemeteries are going to require something. Those that do, that cost has to be borne. And then the other just practical costs, you do have to pay a fee to have someone open and close that grave. And so those typically are the costs associated with the cemetery issue, the vault, the plot itself, and then ancillary services like opening and closing.
And markers, let's talk about markers. There's been a trend lately, well, probably within 10, 15 years, of flat to the ground markers. But there are still upright markers in some cemeteries. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. At Sunset Memorial Park, we allow only flat markers. This was Chester T. French. His idea and mine was to have it look like a park-like setting, which it does. It's a lovely oasis right in the middle of the city, all flat markers. So that is what we allow there. Now we do have a few upright markers in our new Centennial Urn Garden, and we allow those in certain areas. But for the most part, the park is flat markers. Back real quick to the vaults, there are sections of the park that don't require vaults, and those are our crypts, our mausoleum crypts that are outdoor crypts, and then also the niches. The niche walls are complete, so there is no vault
Now,
needed.
crypts are like those walls of marble that have inscriptions on them,
Yes,
and
yes.
they're basically boxes that you slide the
It's designed
casket
for a full
into.
casket burial, but it's above ground, yeah. You know, you mentioned 10, 15 years in the change from flat to upright or upright to flat. And I think you're right. I think there's a tendency maybe nationally for that. But the interesting thing is many cemeteries, Forest Lawn in California, and then French was the first out here at Sunset Memorial Park back in the 20s, were all flat markers. And it was very revolutionary and avant-garde then. There's actually been a little bit of a swing back the other way and an increasing preference for upright markers because of the degree of personalization and customization you can put on an upright, and because technology, even mundane technology like lawn maintenance equipment, is now allowing for fairly efficient and cost-effective maintaining of those grounds, even with upright markers. For a long while, one of the great advantages of having flat markers is you could mow right over everything.
Right.
And you had to mow around and trim around uprights. That isn't the case increasingly anymore. And so I wouldn't be surprised, Gail, if over the next decade you'll actually see an increasing prevalence toward upright markers, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and speaking of personalization, I want to talk about QR codes. Have you ever seen these little squares with multiple squares within them? These are called QR codes or quick response codes. What you're able to do is take your cell phone, and most cell phones can have a QR code reader on them, where you would actually point your camera at the QR code and you would be immediately transported to a website. And these are used, this particular QR code comes from Katzman Monument Company, but there are a number of providers out there. French has another provider that you use. And what you can get once you go to the website, you scan the code using your cell phone, and you're taken to a site that can have photos of the deceased, biographies, audio, video, even family trees, just a whole range of things that you can share information about the deceased. And not only does this little QR code, this has an adhesive on the back, so it could be applied outdoors on a marker in a cemetery, or if there are remains in an urn, you can do more storytelling from beyond the grave using this QR code and your smartphone.
That is a very nice, you touched on several points. Out at Sunset, we offer a QR code to every family that comes in, because we are able to place them not only on the flat markers, but as you said, on the crypt plates, on the niche plates, and it allows family members also to go into this website and add through the years. They can add pictures, photos, comments, so it gives your life story right there in the little code.
It's a living history that once the event is over, once the funerals happen, once the loved one is buried, that, at least in our instance, that account, that online account becomes the family's property. They maintain it, they can add to it. It's a living, growing history that over the years, on the anniversaries, on the birthdays, they add more and more and more, and it really becomes a history repository, an archive for them. And it makes the cemetery very much what we feel it is. It's not a place of death, it's a place of life. It transcends the mundane nature of what we have to do, which is bury a body. It really is a place to celebrate life, and that's a portal right there to a lot of detail that you can't put in an inscription on a stone.
And in that little dash
That
between
little
the
dash.
dates. Yes.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of information, and this helps you get to it.
And just on a practical note, what you usually do is you put one person in charge of accessing the website and helping to upload the information, but a family can certainly share and make it as many people contributing as they wish.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about green burial. We will be talking about that more in our next episode, but do you see much demand for it in a conventional cemetery?
At this point right now, we don't, just to be honest with you. But that's something that's growing, and people are asking more questions. We get a lot of questions. And we are capable of doing that in our cemetery. In fact, we are green burial certified.
Yeah, we're green burial certified both on our mortuary business as well as the cemetery business. And I think the demand will grow, Gail. There's a lot of interest, a lot of noise, and a lot of feeling behind it, but not yet a willingness on most people's part to actually commit to it or to pay for it. And then many cemeteries around the country, specific to cemeteries, don't allow for green burial because it doesn't necessarily fit within their other rules and guidelines. For instance, if they require a concrete vault around that casket, even if it's a green casket, is that a green burial? The purist would say no, and so sometimes you run afoul of cemetery policies or even municipal regulations with green burial. So,
I like to tell people that a Jewish burial or Muslim burial, because it avoids embalming,
correct.
the body's dressed in cotton or linen clothing, the casket, if it's used as like a plain pine or poplar box, that is easily decomposed. That's the closest you can get to green burial in a conventional
in most
cemetery.
cemeteries.
Yeah.
And for our Jewish and Muslim customers, or for those who just want something more greenish, if you will, we will oftentimes facilitate that by potentially not having a base for the vault. We still have the dome that protects the earth load, but the body or the casket is in contact with the ground and actually can go back to Mother Earth. And so
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
that's exactly right. So we want to be able to facilitate that, but to Vaughn's point, there's not a whole lot of actual demand for it yet.
Are there any misconceptions that you see people when they come in?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Chris touched on it. Misconceptions that the cemetery is for the deceased, cemetery is for the dead. The cemetery is actually for the living, and that's putting it very plainly and simple, but it's very true. And we see it every day with our visitors that come in. We see that, you know what, this is for them, this is for the living, something to remember and honor their loved one. And as they come in, it's funny how we hear different stories every time. They'll come in and they may not think about grandma much in the outside world, so to speak. But when they come into the cemetery, it clicks and they tend to go down that memory road.
The other thing, and playing on that same point, in our mortuaries, and mortuaries everywhere, we work intensely with families for 4 days, 5 days, and then the service happens, and then we move on. In a cemetery, we establish a lifelong relationship. We're caring for their loved one in perpetuity, and they get to know my grounds crew. They'll bring them cookies at Christmas, and we know them by name because we're taking care of them. We have a long-term relationship in the cemetery that even in the mortuary we don't have the opportunity to do, and that's a misconception. It's a place bursting with life and joy. There's sorrow and sadness and memories, but it's life, and it's a wonderful place just to be.
And more importantly than cookies, they bring our grounds crew tamales and red chili.
Oh,
Priorities.
especially at Christmas time.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in and sharing. Any last thoughts on what people need to know before they go?
Well, I'd like to say it's been a pleasure to
Yes.
be here. Thank you, and it's neat to have you out there getting people talking more
Yeah.
about planning and about funerals and about a goodbye in general.
Just the need for it is huge, and your awareness raising and our opportunity to share some of that is big. So thank you very much, Gail.
Well, I appreciate you coming in, and think about what you might want. Would you want to be buried in a cemetery? Would you want a flat marker or a raised marker? All this plays into the cost of what you would be looking at for your goodbye. And get out there and shop around. I have to tell you, I helped, when I was writing a goodbye, my husband and I went plot shopping, and we invited his parents to go along because they hadn't made their arrangements yet. And it was very interesting because it's sort of leading by example. We went out there, we said, hey, we're going plot shopping. You want to come along? And they did, and they liked what they saw and they bought, so now we've all got our plots ready to go. And we'll be buried next to his parents at some point, who knows when. So I want to thank you, and thank you to the French family of companies for supporting this program. Join us next week as we discuss green burial and eco-friendly funerals. You can find out more about today's topic as well as a number of valuable resources at my website, agoodgoodbye.com. Remember, talking about sex won't make you pregnant, and talking about funerals won't make you dead. Start a conversation today.
Proper estate planning enables you to pass your possessions and your assets to the people and organizations that you care about. By planning with a living trust, you could avoid the high cost of probate and minimize taxation. The attorneys at Morris Hall have been helping thousands of clients pass their assets as they intended. To schedule your free consultation, call us at 505-889-0100 or visit us at morristrust.com.
A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die is a light touch on a serious subject. The book has everything you need to know before you go. A Good Goodbye helps you reduce stress and family conflict, save money, and create a meaningful, memorable good goodbye. It's available in paperback and all ebook formats through online retailers and at agoodgoodbye.com. Start a conversation today.
Mom, have you thought about whether you want to be buried or cremated when, you know?
Oh, don't make a fuss over me. Just stick me out there between Floppy and Mr. Meow.
Crown molding throughout the kitchen, and wait until you see this son of a... Are you kidding me, man? You don't live here anymore.
I'm just trying to be a good son.
I don't care. Get out of the yard.
No, get out of there.
You can't avoid your funeral. Pre-plan and take the burden off someone else.
Hi, I'm Gail Rubin, host and author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, and creator of The Newly Dead Game. The Newly Dead Game is like the classic TV show The Newlywed Game, but the questions test how well you know someone else's last wishes. It's a fun way to get the funeral planning conversation started. For more information about The Newly Dead Game, visit agoodgoodbye.com.